A man just 5 feet 2 inches tall walks into a Las Vegas casino. Security doesn't stop him. Police officers nod as he passes. High-stakes gamblers pause to watch. Despite his size, this man holds power worth millions, and his word can determine life or death. His nickname, the Ant. But the very attention he craved would eventually become his undoing. This is the story of how one of America's most unlikely mobsters rose to control the criminal underworld of Las Vegas, and how his thirst for power and recognition ultimately led to his downfall. Chicago, 1938. The Great Depression lingers. In a modest 2-story home in a working-class Italian neighborhood on the South Side, Anthony Spilotro is born on May 19th. The house is cramped, 7 people living together, and Tony shares a small bedroom with 5 brothers. His father, Pascal Spilotro, owns Pat's Restaurant, known for its homemade meatballs. But behind the scenes, it's more than a deli. In the back room, some of Chicago's most feared mobsters regularly gather: Gus, Alex, Jackie the lackey, Frank the enforcer, and the boss, Sam Giancana. Young Tony observes them closely. He serves coffee, shines shoes, runs errands, and learns the language of power. One day, while shining shoes on Grand Avenue, Tony clashes with another kid over turf, Frank Colata. They argue and go their separate ways. But when Pascal hears the name, he sends Tony back to find him. Years earlier, Frank's father had protected Pascal from extortion. Now, he insists, their sons will be friends. Tony finds Frank and says, "Our fathers were friends. Now we're going to be friends forever." They shake hands, unknowingly sealing a partnership that would span decades and end in betrayal. The 2 boys form a gang. At first, their crimes are minor, vandalism and petty theft. But Tony has larger plans. He devises a method for following bank customers who withdraw large sums of cash and robbing them at opportune moments. The scheme brings in hundreds of thousands of dollars, a fortune in the 1950s. While Frank celebrates with a new Cadillac, Tony warns him, "Take it back. If the outfit sees it, they'll want their cut." Tony isn't spending, he's investing. He uses his money to buy influence, working his way into the Chicago outfit's inner circle, mainly through an enforcer named Vinny the Saint, who stood just 5 feet 1 inch but had a fearsome reputation. Tony becomes a student of the game, learning from men like Willie Potatoes, Joe the Clown, Milwaukee Phil, and future boss Joey Aiuppa, Joey Doves. But Tony makes it clear to Frank, "One day, I'm going to run the whole thing." Tony's chance to prove himself comes when 2 members of Frank's crew, Billy McCarthy and Jimmy Maraglia, make a fatal mistake. After being thrown out of a mob-owned bar, they ambush and murder 3 people, including mob-connected civilians, in Elmwood Park, a neighborhood considered off-limits for crime. The outfit demands accountability. Tony takes the lead. He convinces Frank to lure Billy into a trap under the pretense of a robbery opportunity. Billy is abducted, tortured, and ultimately killed. Only after Tony crushes his head in a vise, forcing him to give up Jimmy's name. Jimmy is killed soon after. Tony boasts to Frank, "I'm going to be a made man soon." But his confidence borders on arrogance, and it begins to cause problems. One of the outfit's top hitmen, Fiore Fifi Buccieri, returns home to find his house robbed, his wife terrorized, and $400,000 missing. When someone suggests that Tony might be involved, Buccieri summons him. Tony brings protection. His new associate, Frank Lefty Rosenthal, a brilliant gambling expert with mob ties. During the meeting, Tony shows disrespect, prompting Buccieri to attack him and threaten to kill his entire family. Tony narrowly escapes thanks to Lefty's intervention. The incident doesn't end his career, but it's a warning sign. Tony's reckless attitude is becoming dangerous. By 1967, law enforcement pressure in Chicago forces Tony to seek new territory. The outfit needs someone to oversee casino skimming operations in Las Vegas. Their current man, Marshall Cafano, has been banned from the Strip. Tony is chosen to replace him and work alongside Frank Rosenthal, who would handle the casinos under the name of a legitimate frontman, Alan Glick. In 1971, Tony moves his family to Las Vegas and tries to maintain a suburban facade. He befriends Rosenthal and his wife, attends his son's baseball games, and plays the role of a normal family man. But behind the scenes, Tony is building his empire. Before Tony's arrival, Las Vegas was relatively peaceful. The mob kept violence low to avoid drawing attention. Loan sharks operated out of pizza shops. Debt collection was subtle. Tony changes everything. He imposes a street tax on every illegal business. Bookmakers, drug dealers, pimps. Those who refuse to pay are killed. Their bodies are left in public to send a message. Tony brings in trusted men from Chicago, including Frank Collada, recently released from prison. Frank is stunned by Tony's transformation from childhood friend to ruthless enforcer. As one FBI agent later put it, Tony changed the way business was done in Vegas. He took over. Tony's boldness earns him the nickname The Ant, a cleaned-up version of what FBI agent William Romer originally called him, that little pissant. Even when staring down the barrel of Romer's gun, Tony remained defiant, telling him, "Why would I want to live like you?" The nickname stuck, and Tony wore it proudly. Tony Spilotro's rise in Las Vegas marked a turning point for the mob's influence in the city. He was both feared and admired, an unrelenting force of violence, strategy, and ambition. But his thirst for power, fame, and control would eventually lead to conflict with the outfit, with law enforcement, and even with his closest allies. The story of Tony the Ant Spilotro is not just one of organized crime. It's a story of how ambition, loyalty, betrayal, and ego collided in the neon-lit streets of Las Vegas, forever altering the American underworld. By the time I got there, Tony was already running the town, Frank Collada later recalled. He had everyone on the payroll, guys in the sheriff's office, people in the courthouse who could get him jury minutes, even workers at the phone company who tipped him off about wiretaps. Tony ordered Frank to assemble a burglary crew. The deal was simple. They could rob whoever they wanted, as long as Tony got a cut. "We started muscling everyone," Frank said. "Bookmakers, loan sharks, drug dealers, pimps. We beat them, shot their guard dogs, whatever it took. What did we care? Tony had our backs. In fact, half the time he told us who to hit. Then after we robbed them, they'd pay Tony for protection, never realizing he set them up in the first place." Frank's crew became infamous for their skill in breaking into buildings undetected, often by drilling through walls or roofs. The press dubbed them the hole-in-the-wall gang. At this point, Tony was at the height of his power, controlling Las Vegas with an iron grip. But unlike the mob bosses in Chicago, Tony loved publicity. He was in the papers all the time, one associate recalled. He had women showing up in Rolls Royces just to be seen with him. Everyone wanted to be around a gangster, even the celebrities. But Tony's growing fame embarrassed both local law enforcement and the FBI, who created a dedicated task force of over 20 officers just to bring him down. They bugged the Gold Rush jewelry store, which served as Tony's operational headquarters. But Tony was careful. He spoke in code, used body language, and covered his mouth during conversations, afraid of FBI lip readers watching with binoculars. Despite this, the surveillance revealed his incredible work ethic, often working 18-hour days at the Gold Rush, managing dozens of deals and schemes from memory. As one FBI agent later said, "Tony was the smartest and most efficient mobster I ever saw. I think he was a genius, but they also saw the cracks in his personal life. Tony and his wife, Nancy, barely spoke. They slept in separate beds. He was having an affair. One day, his girlfriend stopped by the gold rush. At the same time, Nancy showed up. After a screaming match between the two women, Tony came out and brutally beat his wife in front of customers. FBI agents listening in became so alarmed that they called 911 themselves, pretending to be employees from a nearby restaurant. But when officers arrived, Nancy refused to press charges. In September 1972, Chicago police finally thought they had their case. Tony was charged with first-degree murder and extradited to face trial for his alleged role in the 1963 killing of Leo Foreman, a loan collector. A hitman named Charles Grimaldi had flipped and claimed that Foreman was killed by Tony Mad Sam DeStefano and himself. According to Grimaldi, Foreman had previously pulled a gun on Mad Sam and thrown him out of his office. Days later, Foreman was tortured and murdered in an abandoned house. While awaiting trial, Tony became increasingly anxious, especially about Mad Sam's erratic behavior. Sam showed up to court in pajamas and a wheelchair, shouting into a megaphone. 1 month before the trial, Mad Sam scheduled a meeting in his garage with Tony and his brother. Before it began, a masked gunman shot Sam twice with a shotgun and vanished. The case was never solved, but many believe Tony orchestrated the hit to silence an unstable liability. The gamble worked. Tony was acquitted of all charges and immediately flew back to Las Vegas. In Tony's first 5 years in Las Vegas, the city saw more homicides than in the previous 25 years combined. Law enforcement ramped up pressure, but despite frequent arrests, Tony avoided conviction time after time. But now Tony faced a new enemy, jealousy. While Tony dealt with legal troubles, Frank "Lefty" Rosenthal, his longtime partner, was gaining media attention. After being denied a gaming license due to mob ties, Lefty fought a very public legal battle with the Nevada Gaming Commission. His case dominated headlines. Lefty, meanwhile, became a Vegas celebrity. He was made food and beverage director of the Argent Corporation, the mob-controlled company that owned several strip casinos. He launched a weekly column in the Las Vegas Sun and even hosted the Frank Rosenthal Show, a local TV program featuring celebrities like O.J. Simpson, Jim Brown, and Frank Sinatra. It was one of the highest-rated shows in town, an agent later noted. Lefty became a genuine star. Tony hated it. At one nightclub, after Lefty was greeted by a crowd of admirers, Tony refused to stand. He sneered, "Look at that arrogant expletive. Thinks he's too good to even come say hello." As Lefty rose, Tony fell deeper into paranoia. Under constant surveillance, his influence waned. As one FBI agent put it, "We had Spilotro running errands more than he was running casinos." Frank Collada believed Tony had begun to unravel. Tony spoke of returning to Chicago to kill the entire outfit leadership. When Frank pointed out the other mob families, New York, Philadelphia, Kansas City, would never allow it, Tony replied, "Then I'll have to kill them too." He saw himself as a new Lucky Luciano, with Lefty as his version of Meyer Lansky. But when he shared this plan with Lefty, Lefty refused to go along. "I could see he was starting to hate Lefty," Frank said. Lefty had embarrassed him too many times. Tony also began an affair with Lefty's wife, Jerry, who despised her husband. Tony demanded secrecy. Affairs with other mobsters' wives were strictly forbidden. But eventually, word got out. In 1978, Tony was officially banned from all Nevada casinos when the Gaming Commission added him to the state's Black Book. Without access to casinos, he could no longer oversee the mob's skimming operations. Later that year, 50 FBI agents raided the gold rush, seizing cash, recordings, and documents. Although no charges stuck, the bad press infuriated Chicago bosses, who began to see Tony as a liability. July the 4th, 1981. Frank Culata and the Hole-in-the-Wall gang attempted to rob Bertha's gifts and home furnishings, believing there was a large cash haul from a holiday sale. The moment they drilled through the roof, police swarmed the building. Unbeknownst to them, their alarm expert, Sal Romano, had flipped and informed on the job. The fallout was massive. Top Chicago mob figures, including Joey Aiuppa, were indicted in connection with the casino skimming scheme. They blamed Tony for attracting too much attention. Still, Tony was more concerned with avoiding prison. The case depended on the testimony of Sal Romano, whom Tony had never met. The real threat was Frank Culata. One morning, gunshots woke Frank at his home. His neighbor had been murdered. The suspects fled in a van. Weeks later, the FBI played a recording of Tony putting out a hit on Frank. That was the breaking point. Frank flipped. He confessed to participating in over 6 murders at Tony's orders and confirmed that his phone call had led to Billy McCarthy's death. At trial, Frank's testimony wasn't enough. There was no physical evidence. Tony was acquitted again, but immediately indicted in the casino case. While out on bail in June 1986, Tony visited his brother Michael. They left together, believing they were on their way to a promotion ceremony. Michael to become a made man, Tony to be reinstated. Instead, they were driven to a suburban house where 11 Chicago outfit members waited. Both men were beaten to death in the basement. Their bodies were found days later in an Indiana cornfield, buried in a shallow grave, stuffed into a car trunk. Tony Spilotro's life stands as a cautionary tale of ambition unchecked by wisdom. From a shoe-shine boy in Chicago to the undisputed king of Vegas's underworld, Tony had it all: intelligence, charisma, ruthlessness. But his fatal flaws, craving attention, defying rules, and overstepping his bounds, ultimately destroyed him. In the end, the man who dared everyone to murder him finally met someone who took him up on it.